What is the one reason that maybe one of your best closers quit or almost quit on you?
Ooh, I wasn't ready for this one, but let me dig deep and think about it. I think it's really the plateau effect, where because you're talking about the best closer, right? The best
Best.
one where they've reached a level where they feel like they can't go any further, right?
Salespeople, sales managers, sales VPs, we all got one thing in common. We got to connect with people. And in connecting with people, we need to be efficient and we need to be effective in the way that we do that. One of those things is reaching down and picking up this little device. When I talk about picking up this device, I always talk about it as something called Thor's hammer. I took that from a guy who wrote the Mortgage Marketing Animals, I think is what it was called. And he talked about Thor's hammer. And the interesting thing is when you look at Thor's hammer, it's really, really heavy and only the worthy can pick it up. Well, the same thing applies to the phone. In today's episode of the Money, Mindset, and Mentoring podcast, we're going to talk about what allows salespeople to be effective using the most valuable tool we have today is being the phone. And we've got Chaz here. He runs Call Tools and he knows a lot about data because he gets to see the back engine of a lot of organizations and how they can go from ineffective to massively effective in their markets and being able to reach their clients. So Chaz, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, Steve, it's an absolute pleasure. I know I speak for the entire Call Tools team and myself that we've been really looking forward to this event and meeting with you. So it's an honor to be here.
Thanks, man. Well, one of the things about the honor is really to honor the audience. I want to walk away with people understanding what can they do to get rid of call hesitation. Number one, because the thing is people will look at this hammer and they're like, okay, I'm going to do it. But they don't realize they need to commit. They need to get the soap. They need to get the deodorant. They need to get everything. I don't have a hair, but we'll pretend I do. And so they need to get everything to be able to commit to being a sales effective machine when working on the phone. And the first thing starts with actually getting into action of picking it up. And what do you find when you talk to sales leaders, salespeople, when you start looking at the first idea of people considering a different way of using that technology?
Yeah, so there's a lot to look at there, and that's the great way of putting it. Thor's hammer, that's amazing. But yeah, people have to really, I look at it in two fronts. It's really the individual that needs to take the action and pick up the phone and make the phone call. And there's things as an organization you can do, as a leader, as a manager that you can do to help. I think when you're looking at it from the individual standpoint, they really have to understand why it is that they're doing that, right? Like, what is this going to do for me and for the company, and understand the end goal. So the picking up the phone and making the phone call is the first step. Without that, there's really not much else to talk about, So I find that people that get stuck, they need to find the why, is it because this is my job, my livelihood, and this is for me? Or even deeper than that, sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper, maybe, I'm doing this for my family or for my kids or for my legacy, So from the individual standpoint, I think you have to really motivate yourself, to make the action.
Grant Cardone wrote a book called Sell or Be Sold. And I thought it was one of the most impactful, influential books, in my opinion, in modern sales literature. And one thing he talks about is the idea that the hardest sale that you have to make is not to your clients. The hardest sale is you have to make to yourself, because you got to commit to doing a lot of massive action. And albeit it might even be massive, imperfect action as you get things going, you got to commit to that. And I think you've been quoted saying, put the pen down, pick up the phone.
Yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about that because I think, while technology and that sort of thing is great, I do believe in a Bostonian phrase, don't pave a cow path, because if you can actually, first of all, set an inertia in a direction that allows you to propel success, then that's when you start dumping the kerosene of automation on it.
Sure.
So the idea of putting the pen down and picking up the phone, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So really, thank you for bringing that up. I know we touched on that. That means getting out of your own way, right? Sometimes we see, I've worked with, at this point, hundreds, maybe even thousands of different outbound call centers and teams and sales teams. And what you'll see is people that want to hesitate and procrastinate, they'll find every reason not to get on the phone. Oh, well, what happened yesterday? Why was your call counts lower, Johnny? Well, I was sending emails and I was following up the text messages and I was doing this. Well, that's not really what's going to drive the result here. So I think, psyching yourself out, being excited to get on the phone, being excited about nothing, that's something we talk about a lot, especially internally here at Call Tools. Not about nothing, but everything's exciting, and every phone call you pick up, you don't know what that's going to turn into. So it could be that you're calling the direct person you're trying to, sell or convert, or that person might love you so much and love your energy. Listen, I'm going to introduce you to 5 of my friends that I can't do this right now, but you know what? Because you hit me at the right time, I'm drinking my morning coffee and I'm driving to work. I love you. Your energy is incredible. I'm going to introduce you to 5 other people that,
Yeah.
might be interested.
And that just goes to, again, there's so much you see once you get in out of the planning phase and into the action phase. And I think because so many times people don't listen to what Mike Tyson said, and I think it was Mike Tyson who said this. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but massive imperfect action. What he said is everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face.
Yes.
And, once you get punched in the face, a couple of times, well, maybe you need to shift to the left. Maybe you need to shift to the right. Maybe you need to put a block up. Maybe you need a counter. And you only really get to see that once you're actually into action. And so when we look at elite sales reps, a lot of times what they'll do is they actually save the planning from the beginning component rather than getting up in the morning. What most elite people do is rather than getting up in the morning, and do their planning, they save their planning for the end of day.
That's right.
To plan for the next day. So their morning ritual is action, not planning. The end of the day ritual is review so they know where they stand. Right. What's your thoughts on that structure and how people can implement that effectively?
That's powerful, because the beginning of the day sets the momentum, right? And momentum, something I'll probably talk about, throughout this entire podcast, building that up and having that carry you through, the action you're trying to take. But, getting the planning, the preparation out of the way at night, when you can wake up, get in, maybe have your coffee and dive right into action, that's setting the pace for the entire day, and a lot of times it's easier said than done. I find myself personally, not abiding by that all the time, 100% of the time. And the times where I don't, I really feel it. In the morning, I'll get in, I'm catching up with something that I should have, wrapped up the day before, or planned the day before. And before you know it, the first 2 hours of my day are spent, not executing on the things that I had planned and set out to do, so
that makes total sense. And I think the idea of the end of the day plan rather than beginning of the day plan, so super impactful because are you ahead of the game? Are you behind the game? Can you 10x your week or do you need 100x just to meet your minimum standard because you're behind? And I think that's really important. I think when we look at anything, if it's not actual action in the morning, the other thing would be action in the form of training. When we look at training when it comes to something like what I'm passionate about, which is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA, that sort of space, is training is so critical. I mean, you would never go into a ring without training. Why do salespeople think that they should get in the ring of sales and not implement a good, effective training mechanism?
I see it all the time, and I don't have a great answer for that one. I don't know why they think it's a good idea, but I think always having the backbone. I tell the team we have internally, understanding not just because a lot of sales comes down to psychology, emotional intelligence, being able to speak with people, in a meaningful way, but also understanding your product. I think when you have excellent 100% product knowledge as to what it is, it really takes away a lot of the curve. You don't really need to not understand, but what I'm trying to say essentially is that it allows you to have so many different ways to approach the conversation, that maybe if you don't have that product knowledge that you wouldn't be able to do, and competitor knowledge too, kind of comes into that play as well.
I think the more strategic information a sales rep can have in the process to be effective in understanding not only what their product is, but what their product does specifically for their perfect client, I think that gives them that ammunition that they know they're bringing something of value to the market and they can defend the number one objection, which is the objection that they have in their brain. Sure. Because most people will accept the objection that they give the most. And so if you can reduce that objection in your head, you're going to stop accepting that rejection when it comes to you as part of what you're offering. So I think the idea of having that training, mental training gym in the morning that they can go and they can get the reps out, because I think it just a lot of times comes down to reps. And I know when we're training an arm bar or we're training a triangle or something, the first time you do it, it's going to feel extremely awkward. And try doing a berimbolo the first time. You look like, it doesn't look pretty. And so, but when you get into the moment and you do it again and again and again, it can look like something of beauty. That's the same thing when it comes to sales. And I think when I think to salespeople and the reason why they think they can sell without training is the exact same reason why, Joe, who's at the bar, thinks that he can beat up everybody without any training until he
Right.
finds the beast who shows him that's
Puts
just
him in
not the
his
case.
place.
Exactly. So now the other question I have is so I think we're both in congruent that reps matter, training matters, planning at the end of the day matters, and these are things that are important. Now, what we also see, and you probably see this from a data perspective as well, is you'll see a rep who makes call after call after call, and then gets one call and it goes wrong and they crumble.
All the time. Yes, that's more common than you'd think. I think it probably happens every day, and it probably happens to each person on some level every day, right? And I say it all the time, and I tell no matter what team it is, when I speak to the people who are actually on the phone making the outbound calls, I tell them I think they have one of the hardest jobs in the world. They really do. They have to show up to every call with the same passion, the same energy, and then somebody might, say some unkind things or shoot them down really hard, and whatever it is, and they have to bounce right back from that. I like the fight analogies you keep getting into, dodge that, duck, and get into the next phone call with the same energy and passion they had 3 calls previous. So it is a mental training. It is something that is not, easy until you have done the reps and you've dealt with it. So I think that's your point, and I agree with you. Once the more you put yourself out there, the more you do the thing that you need to do, which is get on and make the calls and connect with people and have conversations. It makes that easier and easier. And if you fall out of that, then maybe those blows will knock you back, a little more than they should.
Well, and those blows, to be fair, like when you look at fighting or, I played rugby for a long period of time. It's not the tackle or the punch that you see. It's the one that you don't see that's going to do the most amount of damage. And I think, a lot of people, they don't train enough. So they actually can't foresee the things that are coming out because they're not learning from other people's experiences. They're just learning from their own. And it's so much easier to get elevation when you're standing on the shoulder of giants. And so if you can learn from other people's mistakes and make that as a thing that you could grow from, it's huge. And that one thing is learning from the mistake of not addressing up front fatigue, burnout. And because if you don't address fatigue and burnout in advance of that problem, it might be too late. We see this a lot in first responders, firefighters, paramedics, where there's not enough engagement in their industry to help them satisfy this problem that's consistent with them, that they don't realize that they're changing until they've changed. And now you have to go back and reprogram all of that.
Sure.
And so what are you seeing really hyper successful sales managers and sales VPs implement as policies or procedures in their business to be able to battle that as a proactive rather than a reactive step?
Yeah, I think really what it comes down to is the data, right? The data always unveils the truth, and I think when we first connected, I spoke a little bit on this, where when I'm looking at analytics as a manager, as a leader, I don't even really want to know who the people are that I'm reviewing, right? I like to black it out and say, instead of John, Mary, Joseph, I just want it to be agent A, agent B, agent C. And having the proper KPIs and metrics in place, you can see very clearly what's happening. How many calls did they make? How many were successful? How many were unsuccessful? Right? Did they work their entire shift, or did they spend 2 hours doing something else? Right? So by analyzing the data, it really gives you the true picture. And then you can start to see, okay, why is this rep's conversion rate lower than somebody else? Then you have a glance into maybe their phone calls. What are they saying? And you can really start to divulge. I think really very quickly, a lot of the times it's very quick to see what's going on once you have the proper metrics.
Well, I think the path is always in the math. That came from I think it was Gary Keller who said that, and I believe that firmly, because numbers, while they can mislead us, they don't lie. And it's our job to look at those numbers and see what sort of trends and things that happen that we need to be able to solve. And I know when we were talking, you had specifically mentioned that some companies, have implemented some really interesting anti-burnout formulas in the way that they handle the soft element or the hardscape around financials and gamification processes
Sure.
in the sales arena. What are some of the key ones that you've seen stand out as great ways that managers will combat fatigue?
Yeah. So I'm not going to talk about it too much during this podcast, but I am the chief operating officer for Call Tools, and having the proper technology and systems in place is something that we see that works extremely well. I ran some metrics, looking at, outbound dialers. And again, these are very generic, it really depends on a lot of factors such as data quality and agent experience and those types of things. But we see, for an outbound role, anywhere between 60 and 80% attrition in like the first 90 days, so people get in, they can't get into the groove, they can't figure it out. And, within that first 90-day period, you'll see a huge fall off, of reps, using the right technology and an auto dialing technology, which again, the technology is great, but what is it really doing? It's taking away the manual pieces that the agent has to do, where they have to motivate themselves to go to that next record. They have to motivate them. It sounds stupid, right? Because these are basic actions. They have to motivate themselves to click on the record. They have to motivate themselves to stay on the phone and listen to it ring. When you take all those extra little steps out of the equation, it allows the agents to just focus, go into an available state, and connect to quality, good conversations,
I
so.
love how you talk about the idea of state, because I think state is something that people really discount, and the state of that pre-programmed actionable technique. Again, to akin it to a fighter in a ring, if a fighter in a ring has to think about, am I supposed to use combo 3 or combo 5?
Yeah.
As it's coming at it just doesn't work. They've got to be in a state of almost automatic operation where it's programmed into their DNA. They know they need to slip. They know they need to move,
Right.
and they know
Muscle
the right things
memory,
to do.
right?
It's a muscle memory. But the second thing around that too is when they're in that situation, they also have to manage stress, because if their stress is at a high degree, their performance is at their lowest degree. And
Sure.
most people really form on around training around the actual activity itself, not around the idea around the stress management element of it. And because if you're at a high degree of stress, you're at your lowest performance. If you lower your stress, you don't have to do anything with your skill, and you're going to automatically perform better. And I know one thing you had talked about with this anti-burnout formula was around micro incentives, stand-up bonuses, and
Yes.
that sort of thing were things that were really key elements to be able to have a company.
Pattern interrupt, breaking that pattern, stand up, getting the body flowing. We used to do this and I operated a large solar call center, and we had the stand up bonus, right? We put on some good music, and we would take, from different reps, what types we had a diverse crowd. We had people that wanted to, in their 20s, that wanted, new age, pop music. We had people in their 50s that wanted, some 70s rock, 80s rock, so we would get the right vibe and stand up. All right, the next couple people that set an appointment are going to get a cash bonus or a cash incentive, and that was great, not just for the time where that was going on, where everyone was standing, but that would have a lasting effect because people got up, they got moving. So for the next hour or two, people kind of would carry that energy forward, so those types of things worked amazing, to keep the team excited. And again, the pattern interrupt of you're sitting there, you're doing this task all day for many hours, talking to people. We talked about some of the people having not so colorful language with you, maybe, and having to get through that. So yeah, keeping it exciting and motivating. I'm not going to go down a tangent about, incentives and that, but the incentive always lines up with the activity that you want to get, right? And it's driving the behavior that you want from the team.
Yeah, exactly. Because at the end of the day, people have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable in the situation that they're operating. And sometimes some third party validation, some third party incentive, in an organization that shows that they care about their people is going to be something that's going to give that ability for people to be able to accelerate. Now, I want to look at, when we look at that fatigue moment, I want you to think back throughout any of your clients or your business, yourself. What is the one reason that maybe one of your best closers quit or almost quit on you?
Ooh, I wasn't ready for this one, but let me dig deep and think about it. I think it's really the plateau effect. where because you're talking about the best closer, right? The best
Best.
one where they've reached a level where they feel like they can't go any further, right? So maybe they're getting X number of sales per month and they've been there for a couple months in a row. So they were having success, they were incrementally doing better, 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 better. Then they hit that plateau moment, right? Where it's like they're getting the same amount, they're putting in the same effort, or in some cases, I've seen it where they're putting in more effort and they're getting the same result. And
Mhm.
again, there's a lot of factors and variables around why that may be. And I think that's where it starts to snowball. They start to feel discouraged, they get into their head like, okay, this is as far as I'm going to go, so they think to do something drastic, like, okay, I'm used to winning, 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 incremental growth, winning, winning, winning. Now I feel like I'm not winning, although I'm still the best on the team, right? I've still got the best numbers. And they're chasing that high again of like that growth. So some people, and it's not a smart move, they think, okay, well, the only thing I could do is just start something fresh and do something else, right? And I think that's a critical moment for that rep. And that's a critical moment for the management to recognize that and to sit with them and say, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
we
that's when
saw
you have
that.
to
We
make
saw
a
that
change,
actually with
you know?
if you look at somebody like Ronda Rousey
Right.
as a great analogy to that situation. She was the best of the best on top, just rocking everybody.
Yeah.
And what got her there was her judo, her grappling. She was just amazing at it. And somebody had the odd inclination to say that she's the best striker in the world. And she decided to become a striker halfway through her career. And then we watched her career plummet. And so people, I think, again, it goes down to the idea of having the right data. I had one of her podcast guests of mine, Ridivon, say that we need to live in an empirically valid world, which means we need to look at the data and let the data help us make decisions and
It's
validate
everything.
our actions based on the data. And so with her, looking at all of her wins that got to where she was and realizing it was not actually from the striking, but rather it was from that beautiful, amazing grappling that she did. And that's the same thing with that top salesperson. What got them there? Now, there is a moment sometimes where you get to a point where what got you there, you got to keep on doing, but you got to add something else.
That's right.
And when you look at that top performer, what are one or two or three things that while they hit that plateau, that can be the accelerant to be able to get to the next job?
I think one that's really relevant to me is that, you get to a certain point and you maybe stop doing the extra, right? That you did to get there in the beginning, right? Maybe you've hit a stride where you're calling at a certain cadence each day, and you do your time and then you kind of log off, or, you stop reaching out on some of those colder opportunities, right? Because listen, I'm hitting the numbers. I'm the best. I'm hitting the numbers. I'm putting my time in. So I think it's digging deeper in your pocket. What's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing repetitively over and over and over and expecting a different result. So you have to you know, do that extra, change it up, whatever that may be, maybe stay later, maybe call those opportunities that have been sitting that are old, that are, 2 months, 3 months, a year old, and digging deep to get those to that next level, and I think that's what happens a lot too with the top guys is that they get comfortable, they're happy, they're by all, when you look at the stats and the dashboard and all the stuff, their numbers their names at the top, they wear it with pride, but who's to say that just because you're at the top, you're still not doing 100% of what you need to be doing, right?
Yeah.
Or taking
Yeah, that
that
makes
extra step.
well, and a lot of that comes from if you have a really good leader who's leading a top sales professional and watching them start to plateau, they can start to identify where one of the most important words that I think exists within business comes into play to help that person reach their next level, which is leverage. And leverage comes through really two key components. Number one, human capital, and the other one is system or technology implementation. And when we look at human capital, that might be, maybe they're going to get an appointment setter now set and they can do just the closes. Or maybe they're going to have, other people handle the account management element of it.
Sure.
And so they can take that part off the plate. So injecting other people into the process allows them to scale and create another level of success for them as a micro business within a business. The second
Yeah, go ahead.
bit
Right.
of leverage goes around the idea of technology. And if you implement technology, especially in the modern age of AI, you're really recruiting a piece of technology to enable somebody. And when you look at technology such as call tools, have you seen people when you start implementing those technologies to create faster, more repeatable success, amplify their results.
Percent. Yeah, and this is actually I'll go to one story that you just triggered for me that was way back, in the previous organization I shared earlier, solar organization, and at the point where we had, I think, the biggest pinnacle where we hit that exponential growth point. We basically had different leads and opportunities we were divvying out to the team, for the appointment setting team. And real old school, we didn't really know what we were doing back then. So we were giving, okay, we're going to email you this Excel spreadsheet. You call these leads. We didn't even have a CRM or any technology, right? You're going to call these leads. We might have even printed them out on paper. You're going to call these. And we quickly came to find that, this person left yesterday. They were sick, so their lead sat. This person went on vacation for a week. Holy crap. Oh my God. All that was sitting there for a week. Oh my goodness. So at the point where we decentralized as an organization all of the opportunities and gave it to, a, kind of group structure where whoever was working and active at that time was getting the leads and the opportunities, that was the biggest. I think when I look at the whole success story of that organization, that would probably be one of the top moments,
So
because
I want to just reaffirm what that
yeah,
means. So what you were saying is, rather than as the lead came in, assigning it to Bob, John, and Sally, what you did instead was, as the lead came in, you had a just-in-time style approach to assigning leads, so that the
for
person
sure.
who's available right at the moment is the one who got the lead.
Exactly correct. Yes.
Yeah, because we all know that speed to lead is probably one of the most important things
Yeah.
in being able to
Yeah.
create success in the sales process.
The stats change in the industry all the time. The one that I've most recently heard is that if you don't call that lead within the first 5 minutes of it being generated as a real-time lead, your chance of getting them on the phone on that first call, when you call them on that first outbound call, drops by 500%. So it's 100% every minute that you're not making that initial phone. So having the proper mechanisms in place, I know I'll speak from the lens of call tools, having a real-time lead distribution where it'll get called immediately within seconds of it hitting the system, or it'll be popped to, the agents that are available, and the first person who's paying attention and clicks that button to grab that lead takes ownership of it, that's going to guarantee you're going to get to those opportunities, and to the concept I was sharing a minute ago, just because a lead came in and I assigned it to you, Steve, why should you maintain sole ownership of that opportunity when you've never spoken to this person? You don't know who they are. They don't know who you are, So I'm trusting that, I'm using your name, but I probably should use an ambiguous name for this example.
No, that's perfectly fine. I'm sitting on a podcast right now, recording a podcast. How can I get to a lead?
Exactly. Well, good point.
It's impossible for me to do that. I have
So
all the desire in the world, but I've got a barrier in front of me.
your hammer is sitting on the desk. I don't know.
It's sitting right there. I just won't pick it up. I'm picking this mic up instead. And, and I think that's very important. I think the idea of it's not, I heard this once, and again, this was from the Cardone, because obviously we talked through 10X, and this is from the Cardone world, where they really just talked about the idea is that, if you manage systems and models, managing people becomes easy. And so having really good systems and models that keep us accountable, we're not actually talking about the person's results. We're talking about, to our opinion, we're talking about the person's results to the standard that's been set, that we've all mutually agreed upon. And if you have that down, and you have that in writing, and you have that in a system and model, even built into a piece of, tool set like call tools, for example, I think that is a wonderful way of doing it, because then everybody knows exactly what the game they're playing in.
Exactly. It makes the expectations extremely clear, and it removes, I think, in business, you really want to remove emotion, not with the people and the individuals. Don't get me wrong. I don't want it to be robotic, that the person you work with, oh, hi, Steve, let's get some, stuff done today, but from the outcome, right? Remove emotion from the outcome and from the day-to-day of the operations of the business, I think is huge. And that's why, to what you're saying, to my example earlier, I don't want to know who I'm analyzing, right? In most cases, because I might be partial. Everyone has bias, right? There's bias everywhere. I might be partial. Oh, I really like, Timmy, his sister and I, grew up together, and he's a really great guy, but his number is at the bottom of the board, right? So maybe subconsciously I'll make excuses or exceptions for his behavior versus somebody who I don't know personally, right? And I don't know, on there. So if you just look at the black and white paper, I think that's what matters.
And I think that meritocracy that exists within having a pure data set devoid of emotions with empirically valid data really allows you to make really educated and smart decisions that are based on logic and not based on emotions. Because emotions, while I think they're really important in many other aspects of our life, when reviewing data and making decisions that way, we need to leave with logic, and the logic will set us free. And I want to talk a little bit about data because I think most companies really don't have a salesperson problem. Most of them have a visibility problem. And I don't know how many times I've sat on, a meeting like this where I'm doing a coaching session with some real estate agent, mortgage broker, business owner, whatever it is. And we're talking about their sales number. And I said, did you do your targets? Oh, yes, I hit my numbers. Did you call this? Oh, yes, I totally did. And did you write those numbers down on a piece of paper? They're like, yes, I did this morning for last week. And you're like, they have a visibility problem and an
Yeah.
accountability problem. What does real data actually?
Great question. And it's a bigger problem than you think, Steve. I've worked with, enterprise level companies, brands you guys might recognize, all the way down to the mom and pop, couple people, company. And everyone, I've seen it on every level in every business, this same problem you're speaking about, the data transparency and that analytics, right? And having it in a readable format too. Some people think just because they have a CRM or a dialing software or whatever it is, oh yeah, we've got those metrics, we got that data, but the data is only as good as you have it structured and how you use it, right? Having the ability to use it. So I guess going back to, previous life again, where I really had it, I used to have, Steve, 6 55-inch TVs on the wall, right? Each with different metrics, dashboards, live. To me, everything, the more real time you get that data, the more quickly you can use it in an actionable way to make a decision, right? So even if I get a report the next morning that shows me the previous day's stats, well, then maybe you're making changes once a day, right? At most, because you're reviewing that data, maybe you're pivoting a couple things, whatever, with, a system like Call Tools or other platforms out there, right? There's a lot of them where you're analyzing your data. If you can get it in a real time or as close to real time as possible, well, now you're talking, right? And you can make changes on the fly and then compare, right? Even within our tool at Call Tools, right? You can have everything set up properly, but we have something called live filters where if you adjust the logic there, but you don't clone it and then do an A/B test, you're still going to miss the boat because let's say, for example, your connection rate was, 20%, and then you make an adjustment and it ends the day at 22%, right? You don't know if the changes you were making intraday were affecting it upwards or downwards or any which direction. But if you clone that and then run it in an isolated fashion, okay, the initial one was at 20%. The one that I adjusted actually dropped to 15%. Oops, I made an uh-oh there. That was a bad change that I made, so.
And I look at that and I think about the idea about speed. We talked about speed to lead. We talked about data systems and models, and the idea of that person who relies on their cell phone with their native contacts inside their cell phone and making the dials and that sort of thing out of there. How the hell would they get any of those numbers?
It's a great question. That's something we come across. I was speaking with actually a close friend, not related to Call Tools at all. And he's like, yeah, I got my sales team and you wouldn't believe it. I ran the numbers, thank God that I gave them company iPhones, so I have some level of transparency to see. And I pulled the call logs, and what I found at the end of the month, I almost fell to the floor, with how many calls these guys are making. And he's like, if I didn't have that at least to go off of, I'd be flying blind completely, So having the metrics is so important, and that's why, maybe there is, and I like a salesperson who hustles, right? Listen, I tried calling. I did pick up my personal cell phone, because I know this person, it's a referral, and I called them off my cell phone. You're not going to see that on my stats, but I got on the phone with them. Doing that as a hustler in certain key situations is great. But I think that having the core system that has all the metrics there I think it's a non-debatable topic, to be honest. I think you need that if you're going to succeed.
Well, I think the idea of what you just said is non-negotiables in your business, I think are critical to have those non-negotiables, because then you have a parameter for how you can define success. And there's nothing that people can hide behind it in a cloak of secrecy. Since I was in the late 90s working for a CRM company, fledgling one. And, it's still back then was the idea of breaking the silos. And I think it goes down to a trust model that exists between leadership and operations, around sales specifically, because once they know that the executive is there to ensure that their success is paramount, then, salespeople start to see that they're orienting it around that success and championing their success and doing everything they can. They'll realize quickly that the leverage you get by implementing
Right.
systems and models is far more effective than you get from running siloed information.
The people who don't like that, the only people who don't like that are the underperformers or the people that are hiding, right? People will embrace, we have an amazing internal team here at Call Tools, and we change our technology all the time, right? We're changing new processes, new things, new updates, and making changes. And they know, because we're aligned in the goal, right? We're aligned in, listen, what we're doing here is to help the business, to help you, which helps you and your commissions and your sales and everything, which helps the business. And it's all the same, goal that we're going after. Once that's understood, and sometimes it's very easy to break that chain. It's just a simple conversation. You sit somebody down. Listen, do you think that we're doing these things just to make you do busy work, just to make you do extra steps, or,
Well,
and once you
that's the
can
one
break
thing about
through.
having a really good tool set. I believe that if you have an effective tool set, the salesperson spends less of the time reporting and more of the time operating. And, the idea that reporting shouldn't exist, would never exist in any competitive capacity. Look at a baseball player, a basketball player, anybody who's at a high level CEO. There's always KPIs that are indicated. You look at the back of a baseball card and you can see all the stats. They're very visible for anybody to be the armchair quarterback for that person's career. And so the idea is you have to have those stats to be effective and track those and make them meaningful. Now, we're going to go to the last component and we're going to talk about disruptors in this space.
Sure.
And I'm going to ask you a bold-faced question. When
I
we
love
look
it.
at AI and the introduction of AI into every aspect and every walk of the business world, a lot of people are feeling under threat. Are call centers dead, and is AI going to take over?
Wow. Great question. I don't think so. I'm going to answer it directly and affirmatively. I do not think call centers are dead. However, I'm a big believer and big advocate for AI. So I think it's incredible. Some people are afraid of it, and I'm sure that there are certain industries and certain things where it is going to have a bigger and deeper impact than others, in terms of replacing, jobs or manual labor, manual things. But I think if you embrace it at the proper level, and I think everyone should. This is, again, my opinion. I know there's many different uh, opinions out there at this moment, but I think if you embrace it and then you use it to your advantage, you can pivot. So if it's something you were doing manually or whatever, well, now AI took over. Okay, well, now I have extra capacity to leverage that AI and do a deeper and better and do a better job than I've ever done with this technology, right? So I think you're very small minded if you think that, oh, this is just going to replace my work or job or whatever, and I've got nothing left. And then in terms of the call center space, I think today is the worst that AI will ever be, right? This very moment, this today, 20 minutes from now, it's probably better than it is right now. So it's only getting smarter. It's only getting better. In a call center capacity, I'm seeing an incredible, different platforms and technology out there for inbound, and handling calls. I'm almost like an advanced IVR, right? Able to have a conversation, able to even answer questions on a basic level. And, even I see in some cases, people are using it for appointment setting. They'll call in, okay, let me get you a follow up with one of our sales representatives, and we'll put it on their calendar. And here's their availability, because it can analyze all these different data points. Here's the availability and booking it. So I think it's very, very powerful. Steve, what are you seeing? How have you seen? I know you've done a lot with AI.
Yeah. I personally look at AI as definitely a disruptor in a lot of spaces. Where I don't think we're going to go in the foreseeable future is where Westward has showed us what the future could look like, where AI really almost becomes a sentient moment and gets to the point that they don't even realize that it's AI. And I think we're far off from that bit. I certainly think where AI is presenting itself in a pure virtual format, not an AI with a robotic element to it, where it gets a physical persona. I think humans, one of the human conditions that we thrive on is connection. And that's the emotional connection. So that ability for us to be able to have a conversation, and whether it is implied or in contract, have somebody else who has accountability in the process. AI is a large language model. AI doesn't really care about you. AI is
Sure.
programmatically answering something, whether it's algorithm or otherwise, it's still answering it as a non-sentient entity. Whereas a sentient entity replying, there is a sense of a human condition of connection. And I think that's something that people still strive for. So if you're a mortgage broker, an insurance
Sure.
broker, real estate agent, if you're out selling solar and that sort of thing, people want to have that connection with the person where they perceive there's that accountability on a one-to-one basis. And that's why I think a lot of people need to work on their personal branding, because that's where the really power is going to come over the next 10 years.
Yeah, having your, persona is important. And I think with the AI too, there's a couple things I wanted to touch on for call center, right? That was part of your question. Was for outbound, you have to make sure you have the proper consent. So right now they are classifying AI voice as pre-recorded audio, which is classified as a robocall, right? So in the lens of call tools and dialing technology, people ask me all the time, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to get a AI bot that can make as many dials as like 10 agents and they could do it all." And I'm just like, that's great as long as you have the proper opt-in consent to make those phone calls. And being in this space, a lot of people don't fully understand all of the regulations and all. So I think that's important to throw out there. So there is always going to be the place for, people that are doing manual outreach on the phone. And again, I don't think it's fully there yet, to your point, Steve. I think that, that personal element, as soon as people, it's pretty quick. Some of them are pretty slick right now where they do sound really, really good, these AIs, but I think most people can still pick up on the fact that it's probably not a real person on the phone.
Absolutely. And I do think, I mean, we were just at the 10X Growth Conference, and one of the things that we saw at the 10X Growth Conference, beautiful setup, big lights, steam, explosions, all this other stuff on the go. And it was fantastic. But what you didn't see, or if you didn't pay attention, were these little screens laid out at about a 15-degree angle that were all around the stage, so that the person who was up on stage could look down and look at their teleprompter and look at their notes. Now, they could have just put the notes up on the screen. You could just sit there and read them, and they couldn't even have to come on stage, because it could have even read in their voice using AI. But the connection
Sure.
that we get is to the person who's reading those notes and personifying in the way that they deliver it. So I think that's still what we're looking for in the human connection. I think we're going to see that going forward. And I think while AI is going to be a massive disruptor, our ability to be able to create that connection as a human is at the
I think
paramount
it's
at the
going to be
center.
a synergy, leveraging it as much as possible. But I think there's going to be key points in a sales process, in a customer service process, where you still are going to want that live person. And I give the example of, it's just certain things that I'm sure that AI will be able to do as it continues to progress. But having a phone call with somebody talking about a mortgage, right, and hearing their dog in the background. Oh wow, yeah, I have two dogs myself. They're Boston Terriers. I hear your dog. What kind of dog? Oh my God, you have a Boston Terrier too? That's incredible. And then that whole beautifully organic conversation that happens for the next 5 to 10 minutes about dogs and the type of food that you give your dog and the daycare. I just don't know that AI can get there yet.
Yeah, I
You
agree
know,
with that. I agree with that. Well, Chaz, man, we covered number one, what it takes for somebody to get over call hesitation, get out there and make massive action, how to identify, how to break down, and how to really combat call fatigue and the ability to keep somebody sustained at a highest level. And the last thing
sure.
is really the power of analytics, and why analytics and data is really important, and how to implement that through really trusted systems and models within your business. Because if you trust a system, you can trust a person. And I think that's really, really important, because you have that unified approach to things. And then the last thing is, while there's disruptors coming into the industry, the value of that human connection is so critically important for salespeople to really understand. And
Sure.
again, if anybody does want to pick up some of those things to be able to implement systems, be able to look at data, and be able to analyze how they can be more effective, they got to go and check out Call Tools, because,
Appreciate
man,
that. Thank you.
you're definitely connected to your market, and it's great having a
Sure.
conversation with you.
Awesome. Steve, it's an absolute pleasure. Again, thank you so, so much for having us on. It's incredible. I know you've had some incredible guests, and I'm honored to be one of them and to now be added to the list of the incredible stuff that you're doing out there.
Thanks, man.
And yeah, thank you. Yeah, if anybody's interested, Call Tools. It's really easy. Calltools.com. My name's Chaz Tedesco, and you can reach out and ask for me over here. I'm very active in our community with our customer base, so I'll get on the phone and speak with any of you. All you have to do is ask for me.
That sounds amazing. And guys, this is the money. This is the mindset. This is the mentoring podcast. Thank you so much for joining. We will see you on the next one.